Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. As always, Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinous. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer, and today my co-host, Dr. Reid Robison, and I explore defense mechanisms. We'll discuss what defense mechanisms are, how they can be adaptive and or maladaptive, the utility of understanding your defensive psychological patterns, the importance of a non-shaming interpretation of defense mechanisms, how to work with them in conventional and psychedelic-assisted therapy, and much more. A couple of announcements for you before we get into the episode. If you're looking for professional training pursuant to becoming a psychedelic-assisted practitioner, check out the courses we offer at Numinous. You can click on the link in the show notes or go directly to numinous.com/training, and you can use the code PTF10 for 10% off selected trainings. If you've listened to the show for a while, you've likely heard Reid and I talk about the psychedelic clinical trial work that we do here at Numinous. If you or someone you know is interested in being a participant in a psychedelic clinical trial, you can click on the link in the show notes or go directly to numinous.com/research, and you can learn more about the trials we're currently running. If you enjoy the show and you'd like to show us support, the best way to do that is to leave us a glowing rating or review in places like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, maybe share the episode with somebody you think would like to hear it or watch it. We appreciate your listenership. Without further ado, here is our episode on defense mechanisms. Well, Reid, last week we recorded an episode about good tools for, mental hygiene, I think we called it.
I don't even remember, but tools, something about tools.
Yeah, we quickly delete the cookies in our brains week to week to free up more space.
Yep, but it crashes otherwise.
Thought it might be fun today to talk a bit about psychological defense mechanisms. This is a term, I guess, made popular by the Freuds back in the day, Sigmund Freud and then his daughter, Anna Freud.
The daddy-daughter dynamic duo.
Yeah, good alliteration.
Yeah, and he was her psychoanalyst, apparently, as well.
Isn't that a trip? That's a little trippy.
Yeah, there are some more recent Freud series and documentaries, and they do a good job at showing some of those things that cause you some inner tension and dissonance.
Is it Anthony Hopkins plays Freud in some show?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Huh. But the term defense mechanisms have from that time found their way into most psychological theories, and even though they were sort of started psychoanalytically, and so much so that sort of your average person probably knows or has heard of defense mechanism before. So
you're being defensive.
Well, and that's an interesting one, right? Because is being defensive a defense mechanism? Like we can discuss a lot of that stuff.
We'll table that. But you know what's, sorry, I interrupted, by the way. I just had to throw in a defense thingy. But you know what's trippy is to think about is if Freud coined the term, and of course a lot of schools of thought led up to that point, what did Plato think about defense mechanisms, or Jesus? What was his Sermon on the Mount of defense mechanisms? I mean, I kind of know what the Buddhists and Hindu think about it, but it's just interesting to think about, given how long humans have existed.
Right. Well, I guess if defense mechanisms are defined as, got my little notes here, unconscious psychological strategies used by individuals to cope with reality and maintain this is more psychoanalytic, self-image by reducing anxiety arising from unacceptable or potentially harmful stimuli, then you can imagine how lots of schools of thought, lots of wisdom traditions would have addressed this being uncomfortable with the realities of our own minds, with the tendencies in our behavior, with the truths of the world, the existential problems that we encounter that are too much for us, that we would defend against them. We would protect ourselves from having to confront those things. Yeah. And you can imagine scenarios where that would be useful that we'll talk about, or even healthy, and scenarios where it would be not useful, maladaptive, dysfunctional, unhealthy.
I was going to ask you to explain it as if I'm 5, but then you did that. But what's that term on Reddit that people use? Like when they ask a question, they say, "Explain it like I'm 5 years old." There's some term.
It's even in an acronym.
Yeah. But anyway, I think that's a great summary. Is that sometimes the emotions and our inner world is too much to bear, and we have evolved these strategies to handle them, and they can either be maladaptive or detrimental to our life and existence, or they can be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess even more, explain it to me like I'm 5 would be, have you heard the metaphor looking at life through rose-colored glasses? What does that mean? It means you've got a lens on through which reality passes that colors reality, and it makes it, in this case, more rosy, more pleasant. So while the grass looks pink, it's not actually pink, it's green. And that might serve you, like we're referencing, or it might not serve you because you're not actually seeing reality as it is.
Yeah, and before we get into specific types or examples, I think it's helpful to follow that thread and look at 2 big kind of templates or categories of defenses, which would be the ones that dissociate or take you away from something that's too much, and the ones that are more cognitive and put an ego enhancing or salve on
spin.
It, right? Yeah. A spin is a term I've heard used for it, because it spins it so your ego can continue to function and not have a panic or breakdown.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good way of sort of distinguishing between defense mechanisms that could be, like you said, adaptive or maladaptive, right? One, it completely disconnects you from the truth. You're dissociated, disconnected from it. And the other spins it in a way that maybe helps you digest something that would be, in its raw form, undigestible.
Although I think some of the dissociative ones can be adaptive, functional. Right? Like if you look at the stages of grief or loss, at like the denial, anger, bargaining, like it would be normal and expected, at least, to go through a stage of denial. But I can imagine moments of very intense trauma. Think of like combat-related violence or whatever. The things you have to compartmentalize in order to do what you need to do to survive.
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe, denial being one of the more classic defense mechanisms, whether or not it's adaptive could be a factor of its intensity, could be a factor of its nature, maybe a factor of its duration. So it can get pretty nuanced. It's not enough to say, oh, denial is unhealthy, denial is bad, because perhaps, given those parameters I just outlined, it could be one or the other.
Yeah. So defense mechanisms, I guess to summarize, aren't inherently good or evil, right, or black and white, good or bad,
healthy or unhealthy.
Yeah. What do you think of fight or flight as a potential example? One, would you consider it a defense mechanism? At least a primitive one. Yeah.
Maybe not in the Freudian sense, right?
Yeah.
Fight or flight is a physiological process, right, that occurs when our nervous system detects a threat to mobilize us to fight this threat, run away from this threat. And there's other things that have been added, like the fawn response or the freeze response. But and so maybe it's not necessarily a defense mechanism in the way that it's hiding the truth of a scenario from you. It's more mobilizing you to deal with it. But certainly the activation that occurs with fight or flight can find its way into your subconscious if it's not fully processed. That's kind of the way we think about, trauma or PTSD, right?
As a primitive, like body defense mechanism, if you will, different category that exists and even predates humans, that's in there for our survival and can get, kind of overactive in our modern day or evolved long ago, and we're in a very different time and place. But, what's interesting to think about is as humans evolved and as intelligence came on board, intelligence amplifies emotion, right? Or I believe one of the key factors in why we can get stuck in these emotional states, especially negative ones. And so you could see how on this trajectory of evolution, defense mechanisms become more problematic in humans because of that like cognitive layer we have.
Yeah, and even in like sort of in the definition that I read at the beginning, the idea that these defense mechanisms are unconscious, that that would require a pretty complex mind to have a conscious and an unconscious.
Yeah.
So I like where you're going with this, that it's our wonderful, beautiful intelligence, the cognitive ability that we have that sets us apart, arguably, from the other animals on the planet, can also be harmful right? It can result in sort of a maladaptive, overly defensive reaction to a stressor, and in the way that we continue to tell ourselves stories about this thing that might keep it out of consciousness, keep us in denial, for example.
So is it both the problem and the solution then? The rose and the thorn, perhaps?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. But it is a double-edged sword, right? And these things are hard to look at by definition, right? Because they are typically beneath the surface level of our awareness. But I find it a fascinating practice to like watch for these or like analyze these. Like I've been showing up consistently late to certain things that, as an example, that I'm looking at and like, why am I doing that? Like, why is this a defense mechanism? Is this just an accidental pattern? Like things that don't matter, but I'm talking about like this weird 5 minutes late to the same yoga class for weeks or something like that. So anyway, it's just an interesting example in the spirit of like self-awareness and exploration.
So if we were to unpack that example a little bit, what might you be, if you're willing to go there, like what might you be defending against or with this potential defense mechanism?
Yeah, and I will admit that this isn't one that I've landed on in terms of like a clear answer of what might be behind it. Like I think I have some other theories that are more, I don't know, biologically based, even though I would love to have something like some thread to follow into the psyche and uncover some vulnerability needing attention. But I think it's more some executive function time blindness that is just surprising me how long it's persisting. But how would you help me explore the possibilities there, or where would you point me next?
Yeah, I think, to your point about bringing it into awareness, we'd probably take a look at if there are any common themes in the things that you're showing up late for. And if you have any conflicting feelings about that. And if there is anything attached to your identity about being involved in these particular things, and maybe some mixed motives, like, and this is more hypothetical, not specific to you, but am I showing up late because part of me wants to have an excuse for, not succeeding in the way that another part of me wants to succeed by being on time to these things? So it's sort of a self-sabotage, self-defense. So that when I examine my quote unquote failure, I can say, well, I wasn't there for the full thing, or I didn't really want to be there anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a fun exploration because it brings up these questions of, are there ways that I might be, even without realizing it, making myself small or hiding, things like that. And, I was even 5 minutes late exactly, maybe 4, to this recording today,
Right.
But I can be on time for like a date, no problem. So it's also a good question on what are the common themes of when it shows up in your life. Yeah.
And that compare and contrast is really useful too, to bring it into awareness. Because like we're referencing, a lot of these defenses aren't necessarily in conscious awareness. And that's why they can result in patterns that are frustrating. They can land a person in therapy. They can result in, maybe even depression or anxiety. They can keep trauma locked in the body and in the psyche. So that's a good place to start, is to sort of just examine the field, bring it in so we can start escorting it into awareness.
Examine the field. Yeah, you're just looking over your crops, your gardens. That brings up another question I thought might be useful for some people is, like, how would you advise people to keep an eye out for when defenses have gone awry or when they become maladaptive? Or what are some signs where you might say it'd be good to go to therapy to work on this, given that defense mechanisms exist in all of us and can be adaptive?
Yeah, I maybe start with education, and we'll go over a list of common defense mechanisms so you know what is possible. But if somebody is noticing, kind of like we were talking about earlier, this self-defeating pattern in their life, right? They don't necessarily know what's going on, but they do know the result of what's going on, and that is they are unsatisfied. Or let's say in terms of a relationship, like they keep getting into relationships that end poorly. They find themselves dating the same kind of person that it doesn't work out with. These patterns are typically signs that maybe there's something going on subconsciously that you are reacting to with a defense mechanism that is resulting in a maladaptive pattern. So again, if you're noticing this distress, then that's maybe a good sign there that we need to shine, as you might say, shine the light of awareness into the darker corners.
Yeah, shadow work. And I like that. This is a low-hanging fruit of shadow work. Not the easiest per se, but low-hanging, but in the sense that it's pervasive in all of us, like defenses. And I think it is a key question of how do you know what to go after? And I like to look at it or break it down. What are your values, hopes, and dreams? Or what, like, by imagining that higher self that you know you're capable of and want to step into, and where are you falling short in your life? And are these ways, and then the next key question, are they things you can easily or reasonably handle on your own? Or are you repeating these patterns and getting frustrated with yourself because you can't just unstuck yourself?
Right. I like the sort of starting with values and seeing, like, what are my values and where am I not sort of living in a way that's consistent with those values? Or what are my goals and why are they my goals? And I'm not, the goals that I haven't achieved, why is that particularly frustrating for me? Why haven't I achieved those goals? Again, we're looking for conflict and we're looking for inconsistency and the psychic friction that causes.
So should I go to therapy? Should I see you for therapy for my being late to yoga class too many times in a row?
I don't think you can afford me. Yeah. I'm too expensive.
Maybe it comes from this I once heard this saying that was deeply disturbing. It was punctuality is a virtue of the bored. And that stuck with me. It's haunted me since. No, I'm being a bit facetious, but it's something that I found really interesting, like that there are two perspectives on this, like be on time or be fashionably late, right? And we all kind of are familiar with those different perspectives and how they apply to different situations. But I think there is this archetype culturally that can exist of, appearing busy and appearing important, things like that.
Yeah. All those variables play into whether or not this particular pattern is frustrating at all, right? So if you're coming from a perspective or a value set or a culture where punctuality in the way that you're describing actually isn't a big deal, then it probably would never even result in the kind of tension or, self-hatred at the very worst, or crumbling relationships that it would in a culture where punctuality is heavily emphasized. So lots of variables.
Lots of variables, lots of things in these shadows. So bring a good flashlight and a good guide.
Yeah. So what might we find? Let's talk a bit, maybe give a few examples of some defense mechanisms. You mentioned one, denial. It's usually at the top of the list. This is sort of refusing to accept reality as it's presented to you, the facts of a situation, because it's usually painful, like you mentioned, loss and the grief process.
Yeah.
I remember when my father passed away years ago, there were moments where I wasn't particularly emotional. I felt kind of detached from this loss.
Yeah.
And had me sort of wondering why. And sometimes it was because, I needed to function for work, needed to function for my family. There were sort of logistics we needed to take care of with respect to his funeral and things like that. And so for me, I was in quote unquote denial, but as I reflect on it, that was functional for me, at least in those instances. And then there were moments where I was able to allow denial, or sort of just, it was, my emotions ambushed me, to recede to the background and really felt the loss. And lots of crying and lots of sort of wondering what's next and reflecting on my life, how it's changed now that my dad is gone.
How old were you at the time?
This was, how long ago? 2017. So, yeah, it's 6 years ago or so.
It's interesting to look at the most common reaction depicted in like movies and things about when someone is informed about a loved one's passing unexpectedly is this crying out no. Like it's almost an expression of a deeply wired denial, and it makes sense. Like you're describing, you can't tackle it, process it, hold it all at once. Especially, depending on what stage of life you're in and what else you're holding.
Yeah, and death denial is one of those, if we ask the existentialists, right, is one of the core existential fears that we live in denial of.
Yeah.
And a lot of the sort of neuroses that we develop are often interpreted in terms of denial of the inevitability of our demise.
Would you apply that to people who are heavily drinking or smoking themselves to death and just pretending like it doesn't matter yet?
It's a good question. Maybe. I think
it's related in some way.
Yeah, and you believe in your own invincibility, so you're just going whole hog and not paying attention to your health. I think it could also be motivated from a different place where there's a part of them that's slowly trying to kill them. They're seeking obliteration, and they might be in denial of that particular motive.
Yeah, and these can be, again, beneath the level of our awareness or subconscious processes going on. And it's possible for something to be a little bit of both, I think.
Yeah.
Peeking in and out.
Yeah, I mean, we have a term for this, like parasuicidal behavior, where people, for instance, will drive recklessly. And if you ask them, they wouldn't necessarily say, like, yeah, I really hope I get in an accident. But if we do a little deep diving and uncovering, there might be at least a part of them down there that's responsible for the reckless driving. That's kind of hoping. Yeah,
for our clinical trials, all the psychedelic studies, for example, and other ones we're doing, that's, part of every visit is a careful suicide assessment and a very detailed history at the beginning, and the structured interviews and questionnaires have those questions about, have you been in any accident in the last month, or have you suffered any injury, intentional or not, just to be able to get some of those out there on the table.
So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's a good example of, like, we have a pattern of behavior that could be attributed to different kinds of defense mechanisms. Same pattern, but in different people, resulting from different kinds of defenses. Yeah. So yeah, denial being one, repression, another popular one. This is where you sort of unconsciously block unacceptable thoughts and feelings from conscious awareness.
Yeah, part of PTSD very commonly would be like not being able to remember certain key parts of the traumatic incident because almost by definition it was too much to bear.
Yeah. And we've had reports of this, of people, for instance, going through the MDMA-assisted therapy trials for PTSD, where when MDMA, allowing some of those defenses to relax, they start to get better access to these memories.
Yeah.
I even, had a client in psychedelic-assisted therapy session recall some of these memories related to a childhood trauma that they knew they were traumatized. They knew something happened. They didn't know the details. In the session, they recalled these details, and then they immediately started questioning those details. Like, am I just inventing these? Is this a repressed memory that I'm creating?
Yeah.
And it made me think of sort of the moral panic was it the 80s? The satanic panic is what they called it, where there was this sort of flood of repressed memories of ritualistic satanic abuse as a result of hypnotherapy sessions. So it's not that implanted false memories aren't a thing. They certainly can be a thing. But where we are now as a field when we do this kind of work is to default believe what's coming up, especially when you've created the safe container and the therapy's deployed.
Yeah. Yeah. And to not default overly impulsively react either in, to be with and explore and go deeper. And because there could be harm in swatting it away, of course.
Right.
And, it could be harm in, jumping prematurely without kind of peeling away layers too.
Well, that's a good point with respect to what we were talking about earlier about the defense mechanisms are neither good nor bad by definition. Because repression, you could argue, is part of what makes PTSD the D part of PTSD, a disorder, right? We've repressed the reality of this trauma, and it's not so much in consciousness, and instead lives in our body. It causes outsized reactions to stimuli that at face value actually aren't threatening, right? So repression might be responsible for some symptoms, but repression might also be a really important defense, sort of keep a person sane or alive.
So it's beyond the repression, the next part you described of like the inappropriately triggered panic response interfering with day-to-day life that becomes that like D in the disorder, where repression might exist in people who had a trauma and don't meet criteria for PTSD, but still repressed because, that was a very intense, too much to bear trauma, but something else was going on at the time that let them hold it without it landing in a very maladaptive place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I had clients ask this, like, all right, you're a shrink. Are you going to put me on your couch and are we going to just like dredge up all my terrible childhood memories? I don't really want to think about those things. Do I need to think about those things in order to feel better? And the answer is yes and no, right? It's not that you have to go through this funhouse horror tour of everything that's terrible that's happened to you. But to the extent that your denial is resulting in your symptoms, it's important that we lovingly and carefully, bring those things into the light of awareness so they can be fully processed and recontextualized.
Yeah. Reparenting, you might hear, is a term for it. Have you dabbled much in schema therapy, by the way?
Not much.
Yeah,
No.
I find it interesting. A lot of the therapies I like to dabble in more with curiosity and pulling into the more commonly used tools in my toolkit, but this one, it's just an interesting one that integrates like these kind of emotion or maladaptive emotion schemes that we develop in childhood if we were in chaotic environments or environments that were where we didn't have enough autonomy or, where we had to be over vigilant and uses both cognitive and interpersonal. A lot of defense mechanism work comes out of that, which is why I bring it up.
Yeah, I remember being exposed to it a little in graduate school, but the term schema was used more in sort of our cognitive behavioral classes, like CBT classes, just sort of the mental structure that you form that helps you navigate the world.
Yeah, and it helps you understand, like, why do you have these defense mechanisms, or why does this one exist? It helps you connect some dots and put it together, perhaps categorically, as you're working on things that can become helpful. Not mandatory,
right?
But yeah,
I like it. Another common one, projection. So this is where you've got sort of these unacceptable things about you that you project onto others, and then you sort of hate them in others. Yeah, exactly. Sort of a common example of this is, let's say you are cheating on a partner, and then you start accusing your partner of infidelity, like at any turn. It's like, oh, let me look at your phone. Who are you messaging? So you're projecting this thing about you that you feel shame about onto them, and you're sort of hammering it in them because it's too hard to look at. You.
And it's hard to call these things strictly unconscious because, like, often the person may very well be so caught up in that they're clueless about it, but there can be a variation of like someone projecting in that way might be somewhat aware of what they're doing and just trying to hide it too much to handle inside if they were discovered or discovered to be the bad person.
Yeah. That's a good call out, a good point. So it's maybe contrary to the earlier Freudian definitions of defense mechanisms, they aren't necessarily or completely unconscious.
Everything's a spectrum, I guess.
Yeah. Correct. So yeah, projection, a common one. Displacement is another one that I think probably everybody can relate to. This is where sort of you've got a stressor that's attributable to a particular stimuli, but you can't deal with it there, so you displace it somewhere else.
Take it out on someone else.
Yeah.
Unfairly. Yeah.
Because it's not them, right, who's causing it. So the common example is I really hate my boss. My boss is yelling at me. I can't yell back at my boss because of the threat of losing my job. So I come home and I yell at the dog, or I mistreat my kids or something.
Yeah. And so would a healthy version of displacement be taking it out on the punching bag in your garage?
Perhaps.
Yeah. Just to try and continue that thread and look at these neutrally.
Perhaps. I mean, ideally, you'd be able to find a way to navigate that feeling with the boss in this example.
Yeah.
And that might even mean like quitting or something like that, getting that person out of your life. But in an instance where you really can't do that, or it's not wise to do that, there might be a way to discharge that energy somewhere else. Freud talked about catharsis, this idea.
Yeah.
And that came from his sort of hydraulic a metaphor of the human psyche, that we have this libidinal energy that builds up at these certain stages, and we need to cathect it into certain expressions. But recent research has suggested that catharsis in the way that is generally understood is not necessarily therapeutic. Like just punching the punching bag without actual resolution or skill building doesn't typically lead to mental health.
Yeah, and you can see how it could be a step in the right direction if you're punching a punching bag instead of your wall or whatever. But yeah, it's such an interesting evolution of these concepts. I'm thinking of Peter Levine's books on trauma and somatic experiencing, where he talks about how animals in the wild would, after a big fight or intense trauma, if you will, would go out into a field that's more chill and just shake it out, like move the body, move energy. And like we like to use that example, but in reality, humans have evolved with this extra like cortical thickness and intelligence and other strategies that are usable. Like the tiger fight couldn't have really talked through it, right? So it is, it's a great example that we learn a lot from, but it's also complicated.
Yeah, the tiger doesn't go after the fight, go back and sit under a tree and reflect on it. It's like, man, I'm so aggressive. Why am I so aggressive? I shouldn't have been so aggressive, right? That cortical thickness allows us to think about our behavior, which, as you pointed out earlier on the conversation, is a superpower and potential weakness.
Thinking about thinking and feeling and all that.
Yeah. So then there's regression. This is where we sort of revert to an earlier stage of development in the face of a stressor. So this is like, a stressed adult starts acting in childlike ways. And
Hug a teddy bear if you want.
Yeah, or throwing a tantrum around people who can actually, who tend to meet that adult tantrum with, attention. So a way of getting attention in ways that are arguably maladaptive. And this speaks to the sort of the unconscious process of this particular defense mechanism. So I'm regressing. It's not like a deliberate plan, like, I'm going to go throw a tantrum so I can get attention. It might be something less conscious. And so you can imagine how that would really affect relationships and prevent you from really engaging with the opportunity to develop better coping strategies or more adaptive coping strategies in the face of that stressor.
You know what's... I don't know, an interesting, perhaps, aside coming to mind, maybe irrelevant, you tell me, but one of my kids went boating with a friend yesterday because we're recording around this holiday weekend. And he was just telling me about this when he came back, that the friend's dad who drove the boat was faced with some stress, like the busiest day of the year, long line to put your boat in the water, and a lot to navigate on super crowded waters. And even like someone's finger getting injured, a little mild, but afterwards, my son was just saying, it was interesting that he said, "I'm sorry, I was a bit frazzled or frustrated." But my son was saying he didn't notice he was at all. He thought he was perfectly calm. So I bring it up because I thought that comment, it was just a sign that this driver of the boat, this parent, probably had a lot of self-awareness of their, potential defense mechanisms and reactions to certain stressors. I think in a positive way, of course. We can overthink and ruminate on what we think may happen that might not even need to be brought up. But yeah.
It's a good example. And it makes me think of your question earlier about what might one do in therapy about defense mechanisms like this. And in the service of bringing it into awareness and then working with it in awareness, imagining this person that your son interacted with, they have this tendency to get grumpy. Maybe it's regression, but now they have some awareness about it. It doesn't stop the pattern necessarily from happening, but they're able to catch it at some point and then make repairs, right? Apologize.
Yeah. And patterns don't usually die instantly.
Right.
And it's often like a diminishing of these responses in the real world. Like if you're triggered into a fight or flight by like an old, say, combat related trauma trigger, and you're working on this extinction, Pavlovian reconditioning by training your nervous system to not have the same level of response. The thing is, we need our fight or flight to exist.
Yeah.
But it is kind of a slow process. I think it's just important to keep in mind to extinguish or more likely diminish some of these.
Yeah. It takes time. Be patient. I hope it's okay. I'm just burning through this list.
Yeah.
I think it might be useful just to kind of get a sense for our listeners of these different examples of defense mechanisms. So another one is sublimation. And this is one I remember learning about in graduate school and having a conversation in class about the, like what we were calling adaptive and maybe maladaptive application of this one. But this is where you're channeling what might be unacceptable impulses into more acceptable activities. So this is a person maybe with characterologically aggressive impulses. And instead of, wandering the streets and beating up people, they get into combat sports. Or maybe they join the military. Again, these are arguable, but it would be arguable that better than acting on those aggressive impulses in a way that could really do harm, that could result in jail time. You don't necessarily, quote unquote, solve the problem of your aggression. Instead, you're channeling it in ways that are more socially acceptable and, quote unquote, healthy.
Like going on a walk instead of choosing to stay and fight with your spouse when you're noticing that you're kind of super defensive or dysregulating or whatever.
I guess, yeah, if your body needs to do something because you're super dysregulated, and the initial impulse is my body wants to like move toward this person I'm in an argument with, and be aggressive, going on the walk is a different way of using your body. So in that way, I guess it could be a sublimation.
Yeah. How about a bad example of sublimation? I'm just raising it as an interesting question because I think you see the definition might be converting, the unacceptable into acceptable more commonly, but I wonder if it really just means converting one into another and, could apply to some of those like hardwired age-old evolutionary defenses. But, yeah. Anyway, that's maybe not productive as a tangent.
I mean, the thought that I had in response to your question was, if the sublimation is keeping the impulse in the dark of your subconscious, that prevents you from maybe doing what could be therapeutic work on it that would eventually improve your life, then perhaps it's dysfunctional. Yeah. Even if it's keeping you from beating up people on the street.
Like, do you come back after your walk to cool off and have the discussion in a more productive way with your partner? Mm-hmm. And did you tell them, like, I feel a bit like I'm flooded, or I need a moment. Is it okay if we revisit this in 15 minutes? Versus like, no explanation, turn around, walk out, slam the door, walk away, and try and ignore it happened.
Right. Yeah. So is it a tool to calm down so you can re-engage, or is it a way to avoid?
Yeah. And I guess it depends what happens next.
Right. Another is rationalization. So this is where creating overly logical and rational explanations for irrational behavior. So the example I've got here, a student who fails an exam blames the teacher's unfairness and the difficulty of the questions rather than acknowledging their own lack of preparation or study. I totally did this in college. Uh-huh. There was a point in my college education where I was like a nightmare for our TA.
Your ego needed to at the time.
Yeah. It's not, I was told I was smart growing up. I was the smart kid. And here I did poorly on an exam. That doesn't sync up with my self-conceptualization. It must be something else. So I rationalize an alternative explanation.
And maybe it was helpful so you didn't get in such a hopeless, self-defeating place of like, I can't do this, just thinking about it that way.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think it probably helped me given the developmental stage I was at. And then fortunately, like being able to confront a little bit more in therapy. I remember a therapist I had in college was like, this is when I was in graduate school. He's like, Steve, you do know that when you get your degree, it won't have your report card on there. It's just going to say Dr. Thayer, right? It's just going to say Doctor of Philosophy. It's not going to have your report card. So what if you instead let go of this idea that you are quote unquote smart? Let's look at what that even means.
Yeah.
And so that was a way for me to just sort of look at my behavior coming from as a defense mechanism that was an old toy or an old tool that was serving me in a way that no longer served me.
I kind of get the sense that we all have to go through a number of these passageways in human development, especially it's child development and adult development of like, I'm asking these questions of like, is it good or bad, or was it helpful at the time? Because I think it's just helpful not to overly pathologize them and know that this is how we get to that place of taking radical responsibility for your test scores. And I don't think it's expected of humans to be there at age 10 or 15. Right. Necessarily, right? And we all have our own path through that. And this is the path of like, seeing it and then, shifting our patterns in accord with our values.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the non-pathologizing approach. And our listeners are getting sick of hearing me talk about IFS. But I really love the way internal family systems thinks about these defense mechanisms in terms of parts, right? Firefighters, managers.
Yeah, me too.
Protectors and exiles, and they serve a purpose like we've been discussing, like you keep pointing out. And sometimes that purpose is the double-edged sword. The negative side is cutting us in a way we want to stop doing. And that's why we go to them and try to heal them. But they aren't bad in and of themselves. They aren't evil in and of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about parts work a lot. My mind just kept wandering there when, to help make sense of some of these like tricky textbook psychological concepts and translate them into like useful everyday life. I think parts work does a great job at that, like making all this stuff accessible in real time when you really need it out in the wild when triggered. And if you want to spot your defenses and not, yell at them and chase them away or make them worse.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've talked about it on the show before, but like the idea of parts and multiplicity has been one of the more useful concepts for me personally in dealing in the way that you just described, sort of day to day. Especially the tendency I used to have to be more self-shaming has given way to a new tendency to be more self-compassionate, which has been huge for me. And I've seen it change the lives of several of my clients too.
A little flip in your consciousness, perhaps, but a huge, like a radical change in perspective of the world and like how you can show up that self-compassion.
It's not that I wasn't exposed to self-compassion at any time in my life. The framework itself just satisfied sometimes, a mind of mine that is too perfectionistic about frameworks and where I sort of poke holes in them. But this one was satisfying enough that I believe it. I can continue to believe it, that it's that these parts of me do deserve compassion for believable. Hopefully that makes sense to some of you, but for believable reasons.
Yeah, and believable, not because it's the most empirically validated psychotherapy. It's one of the newer ones, and in need of more robust, like psychotherapy research to, help it further evolve and get adopted and covered for things perhaps. But yeah, like I know what you mean because it resonates and it's quite applicable. Yeah.
Yeah. Good point. And it's another term I would use. It's philosophically satisfying to me, where other frameworks have not been as philosophically satisfying.
It's a litmus test, I think, that happens similar to defense mechanisms on a regular basis for many things of just like, is this framework satisfying to my unique psyche? Yes or no? And I find that really interesting too.
Yeah. Yeah. Does it create harmony in my psyche or does it create disharmony or dissonance?
Some things fit well and work well. And that's why sometimes you do need to go through a few different therapists or books on a certain thing to see what really resonates with you and lands and works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes things will resonate at certain chapters in your life and will stop resonating at others. So it's a testament to, I think, the need to continue learning, continue exploring.
Mm-hmm.
continue creating. Another one, reaction formation. And this is one I forget why those two words are used to describe this particular defense mechanism, because it's not exactly face valid, but the definition, behaving in a way that is opposite to one's unacceptable thoughts or feelings.
Just because you're like fabricating a reaction that wouldn't otherwise be the natural, like you had a breakup supposed to be sad, you've just kind of constructed a reaction of happy.
There you go. Okay. So yeah, or if let's say you really, really don't like somebody and instead you are treating them with just gooey kindness all the time. You're reacting, you're sort of forming this reaction and in response to, maybe the dissonance you feel, I shouldn't hate somebody.
Yeah.
So I'm going to deny those feelings and just behave in a way that is opposite to how I actually feel. You can imagine if you hear that, how that might result in some messy relationships or some intrapsychic pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we've said it on here before, especially in the realm of like emotions, but one of the most loving things we can do for another is to tell the truth about how we really feel. And with all the disclaimers that, during development and different times of life, there are a lot of factors going into timing of telling someone the truth of how you really feel. Right. Like your reaction formation could have been adaptive because you just met someone in a place that it would not be adaptive to do otherwise.
Yeah. So those disclaimers sort of imply nuances here where let's say I, really don't like this person. And if I just sort of behaved in a way that was very consistent with that impulse, I might start behaving in ways that are cruel. And maybe I have a personal value of not being cruel. So I want to your point, be truthful, but I also don't want to be needlessly cruel.
Dissonance.
I want to set boundaries, right? But I also don't want to I don't want to harm others unnecessarily. So there's nuance there.
Maybe I'm just throwing all this nuance into the conversation as a defense mechanism because I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Truth revealed.
Yeah.
Truth revealed. Yeah.
Here's another nuance.
If any listeners are detecting our unconscious defenses, please let us know so that we can improve. We can take it to our therapists.
I am open to having 1 million of them, and I'm still chipping away at it.
Oh man, be careful what you ask for, Reid. All right. So, got a few minutes left. Those were sort of the classic Freudian defense mechanisms. Sometimes there are other terms that are put forward as defense mechanisms, like altruism, humor. Humor is one I've thought about a lot. We were talking before we record about sarcasm, and I grew up in a household that loved sarcasm, loved irony, and was a bit cynical sometimes.
Yeah. I like looking at sarcasm as a defense mechanism, as an example of a fun one, a funny one. And it can go awry, of course. And if any of these tools, if you will, or strategies are misused. But I've heard it described that there are tactical defense mechanisms and like more formal, if you will, but like vagueness, speaking in generalities, sarcasm, like nonverbal stuff. So I think we could get extremely broad in our definitions. And I don't want to overcomplicate, but I just think it's useful to have a gestalt about what is a kind of defense mechanism. What is the mechanism we're talking about here?
Yeah, I'll use humor as an example. I remember being in graduate school it was a group therapy class, and the way they taught this particular class was to put us in a process group, and have us start interacting. And it wasn't sort of necessarily therapy. We weren't talking about our deep psychic wounds necessarily, but it was an interpersonal process group. And I had a habit of cracking wise, of trying to make people laugh. And I do that for many reasons. One is I just love to delight people and but I also love to be the funny one. And I loved the praise that I got for that. So we're in one of these groups, and the conversation was getting a little too close to some insecurities of mine. And I made a joke, and people laughed. And then one of the other group members, one of my cohort members, said, "Steve, stop being funny."
Oh.
And just the air got sucked out of the room.
Called you out.
Yeah. And I just sort of sat there and was like, oh, why am I being funny? I think, yeah. And the insight that I just expressed was not one that I had at the time, meaning that I was trying to deflect, trying to distract.
Did you just yell at them, no, you're being funny? Or did you say, I'm not being funny?
I'm not being funny. I'm not trying to be funny. It's just who I am.
Or did you stand up and create a reaction of bawling or something?
I just wept so that they would run to my aid. No, there was just silence for a while. And then I don't remember, actually. Now I'm repressing it because I don't remember exactly what happened next. But I do remember that moment. And so it's had me think about my humor and some of these tactical defense mechanisms, as you put it, and how they can evolve, right? It's not that I had to stop trying to be funny, because that was an important part of me. I like that.
Yeah. Is it repressed, or is it just accidentally filed away incorrectly or buried or whatever?
Yeah.
It's just memory's fickle. It's another funny thing to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think humor is a good example of one of those. Self-assertion is one that I came across as one of these sort of more modern and perhaps mature defense mechanisms. So expressing one's thoughts and feelings in a direct yet non-confrontational and non-manipulative way. A way of sort of defending from you being, I don't know, boundaryless and people stepping all this, being a welcome mat. I don't want to be that way, so I'm going to be assertive as opposed to aggressive.
Yeah.
And we could get into the weeds about any of these, but we don't have time to be in the weeds. We got to wrap up here pretty soon.
Yeah. So I read this. I saw this thing. I don't open Instagram or social media every day, but I like to now and then. And I went on there today, and the first thing that showed up in my feed, I clipped it because I thought it just made me think of this topic. It said, the spiritual community pushes this narrative of love and light so strongly and neglects to explain that you must enter the darkness to reach that love and light. If you're not acknowledging these negative parts, your practice is surface level.
Ah, yes. The dreaded spiritual bypass.
Yeah. And so I thought that was a good reminder to do your shadow work and just maybe a challenge to folks to, in the coming week, just try and have some awareness of your defense mechanisms.
Indeed. And there are lots of ways to address defense mechanisms on your own, to do it in psychotherapy. We made reference to some psychedelic-assisted therapy today and how psychedelic medicines have this really interesting way of softening defenses so we can access what they're defending for or against. It's important to approach that with, as we always foot stomp on here, lots of preparation and with the right context and setting and mindset, all that stuff. But yeah, appreciate the conversation. As always, hopefully this was useful to everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for the free therapy, Steve.
Anytime. Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinous, a mental wellness company committed to tackling the global mental health crisis by delivering best-in-class psychedelic-assisted therapies, contributing to the body of primary and clinical psychedelic research, and fostering healing through community connection and social responsibility. You can learn more about Numinous at numinous.com. That's Numinus.com. If you enjoyed the show today and you want to support us, here's how you do it. Rate and review the show on platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe to the Numinous YouTube channel, like the videos, and share it. Share the show or clips of the show with someone that you think will enjoy it. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.